Welcome, everyone, to a very special edition of our Innovations in Tobacco Control lecture series in observance of Earth Month and Earth Day. I'm Joanna Cohn. I'm director of the Institute for Global Tobacco Control here at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. So in honor of Earth Day, I wanted to say that all of us as researchers and public health practitioners are deeply aware of the devastation that the tobacco epidemic has brought upon people as well as our planet. Here is a fact that is certainly not fun. Globally, 4.5 trillion cigarettes are littered into the environment each year, a staggering number that is almost identical to the total number of cigarettes consumed worldwide each and every year. But what is clear is that many of the same policy interventions that can help reduce tobacco-caused death and disease can also improve the health of our planet. And today we will learn more about this during our Earth Day lecture, discussing key findings from recent assessments of tobacco product litter in two distinct parts of the world. And I am so excited to introduce today's innovation speaker, Dr. Ryan Kennedy. I know that Earth Day is very special to Ryan, not only because he's very committed to environmental justice, but also because it's his birthday and it's his wife Simone's birthday as well. So double cake in the household. And this auspicious birthday likely influenced some of Ryan's early academic training. His undergraduate degree is from the faculty environment from the University of Waterloo, where he studied ecology and physical geography. And he completed a master's in applied environmental studies from Waterloo as well. Ryan worked in the field of air quality and supported air quality monitoring in British Columbia in Canada. His knowledge about air quality monitoring helped transition Ryan into tobacco control. Some of his early work included measuring air pollution in a variety of hospitality settings like restaurants, bars, and casinos. And I think cruise ships we can add to the list as well. Ryan completed his PhD with Jeffrey Fong at the University of Waterloo, studying tobacco control and working on the International Tobacco Control Policy Evaluation Project, which many of us know as ITC. And then we were really fortunate when Ryan joined Hopkins in 2013. He's now an associate professor in the Department of Health, Behavior, and Society. And he continues to work in a variety of tobacco control areas, including understanding how design features of products are portrayed in advertisements, smoke-free policy evaluations, health warning design, and a range of other tobacco regulatory science and policy areas. So I'm going to hand it over to Ryan in a moment, but first I'd like to share that for today's event, we will not be taking audience questions via Zoom. Instead, viewers are encouraged to submit written questions via the YouTube live chat feature. And then we'll be engaging in real-time conversation with Dr. Kennedy and select research partners from these studies. So following the lecture, I'll be asking Dr. Kennedy some questions of my own, and then we'll invite you to stay through to the end for a short video featuring highlights from one of these studies that he'll be talking about. But for now, it's my distinct pleasure to welcome Dr. Ryan Kennedy for today's Earth Day Innovations in Tobacco Control lecture, and he'll be talking about tobacco product waste and the environment.
Thank you, Joanna. I'm thrilled to be here. I really appreciate that kind introduction. I'm going to be talking today, like you said, about some of the work we've been doing here at IGTC, studying tobacco waste in the environment. I'm going to be presenting works of a study I did with my colleague Grazi Grillo in India, and I'll do my best to present some of the work that Grazi has also supported in Brazil. Grazi is not here because she's on parental leave, but her contributions to these studies have been tremendous. Tobacco products, as we well know, have a really deep and significant impact on health. We estimate over 8 million deaths a year are caused by um, uh, diseases caused from the use of tobacco products. And like Joanna said, cigarette butts, one of the many forms of tobacco product waste, is considered to be the most littered tobacco or the most littered item in the world. I'll reiterate, 4.5 trillion cigarette butts are estimated to be littered around the world every year. And these butts, obviously, their direct impact on the environment as a form of litter, their presence in the environment impacts our enjoyment of specific spaces. But further, these products contain toxins within their cellulose acetate that can enter the environment and impact our soils and waters and have long-reaching impacts on the environment, including impacting the health of fish and wildlife. There are lots of other forms of tobacco product litter. As you can imagine, cigarette butts are very, very relevant, but other aspects of tobacco product packaging, like cellophane, the packaging that the products come in. Of course, there are lots of other forms of tobacco too. Today, we'll be talking about our work in India, where the most common form of tobacco used is smokeless tobacco, and that creates a whole different collection of wastes, largely from the packaging where the products are sold. Those can be made of foil or papers or treated paper or plastics. And each of those different constituents has its own unique impact on the environment. Um, I wanted to again wish everyone a happy Earth Day. 2024 marks the 54th anniversary of this celebration. The original sort of coast to coast event took place in 1970. There were events across the US, the most notable in New York City and Central Park, which attracted over 100,000 people. And if you look at sort of some of the media around that day in the event, and I've shared one of the articles from the New York Times just days after the Earth Day. One of the really important issues that was top of mind back then was litter, and not just litter for the sake of it being present in the environment, but the noted rising costs that were being borne by municipalities and others to manage cleaning up this scourge of trash, as is mentioned in this article. Um, the We've done more and more in tobacco control to support smoke-free spaces with the hope to clean the air and make things healthier for folks. And to some extent, the indirect policy strategies to address litter have been really helpful to expand some of these smoke-free air initiatives. One of the first things I worked on in the field of tobacco control was to support a group of young people in Canada that were trying to advance tobacco control policies. And this brilliant collection of young activists and policy advocates decided that they wanted to work on expanding smoke-free spaces to public parks. And they went to the parks throughout the community and collected the cigarette butts and then fashioned this piece of art. It's a slide like you might find at a kid's playground, but the slide is constructed of thousands of cigarette butts. And they were really instrumental in helping to advance some of those smoke-free policies across our community. For World No Tobacco Day in 2022, the WHO, the World Health Organization, focused on the environmental impacts of tobacco. Joanna's mentioned some of them. This day, a couple of years ago, was used really to highlight the broad impacts of the industry. Of course, beyond the litter issues that we've talked about, every step of the manufacturing process, distribution process has an environmental impact, including the transfer of lands that were used for forests to lands that are being used to cultivate tobacco, all the emissions associated with the production and distribution of these products, and of course, every step in that process uses millions of tons of water. So, with respect to tobacco product waste, the trillions of cigarette butts that are entering the environment have this real concern. We talked about some of the constituents. The filters, when they enter the ecosystem, they can release some of the constituents that they have gathered from the combustible products, including heavy metals and other chemicals. And we'll talk more about that in the study that Grazi oversaw in Brazil. In an effort to sort of protect some of these surface waters in particular, we've seen a real rise in smoke free and tobacco free spaces around beaches. The state of Maine, for example, in 2009, so many years ago now, made all beaches in Maine smoke free. And the initial goal of this was, of course, to create clean air. But it was secondarily an effort to protect the contamination from cigarette butts into surface waters that potentially could impact important resources like the fisheries. And so I'm going to start with characterizing and describing some of the work that was conducted in Brazil. And I'll do my best for Grazi's sake to try and be as comprehensive as possible. So Brazil, of course, those of us that work in tobacco control, we know Brazil is a real world leader in terms of enacting comprehensive tobacco control policies. They are a signatory and they've ratified the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. They were, as well as the illicit trade protocol, they were the second country in the world to adopt all the M-Power measures. Those are the policies that are considered to have the greatest and deepest impact on population health. They've got great comprehensive smoke-free laws. They've banned advertising. So Brazil, in many ways, is doing very well in terms of tobacco control and have, in some ways, enviable prevalence rates. Less than 13% of adults use cigarettes. And you can see some of the packs here from Brazil and their notable health warning labels. So the study that took place in Brazil, the study team was based at the University of Sao Paulo. Dr. Victor and Dr. Ribeiro led the study. The collaborators included Mariana Pino and Monica Andreas from ACT, and our own Kevin Welding at IGTC, and of course Grazi, who I've mentioned. The study had three goals. First, they wanted to determine the density of littered cigarette butts in the city of Guarujá. Second, they wanted to estimate the extent to which constituents in the cigarette butts mobilized or could be mobilized into the environment, the leachate. And finally, they wanted to see if the cigarette butts, if they could examine the butts and determine whether or not the cigarettes that they came from were permitted or didn't have legal access to the market in Brazil. So the methods. So doesn't this look beautiful? I'm sure the beach isn't always that unoccupied. Guarujá is a coastal town. You can see in the map where it's situated in Sao Paulo State and where Sao Paulo State is situated in the southern part of the country of Brazil. The sampling for their butt collection, they decided to do butt collection in 9 different areas of the city, and they picked parts of the city to sample based on their urban density. So the city planning office had records that they were able to use to identify sampling locations. 3 sampling locations, S1, 2, and 3, they were high density neighborhoods. And then there were moderate and low urban density measures too. And that was just to sort of make sure that they were sampling across the city. We can see some of the pictures here of the data collectors that were in the field collecting the cigarette butts. The methods were they picked in each of these 9 areas a swath of data collection that sort of straddled this street sidewalk area about a meter wide, and they were collecting sort of a lateral collections distance that ranged by site, but the range was around 700 to around 1100 meters. So then the square meterage can be calculated for each of the areas to determine the density of cigarette butts that were identified. other considerations in their sampling, they were able to determine when street cleaning was happening, so they wouldn't be collecting right after things, for example, had been cleaned. They were also they conducted the sampling in March and April, which are a lower tourism period in the year, so that they weren't. They were trying to capture the impacts that would be representative of the city and not necessarily an influx of, although that would be an interesting study too, I think. And so what they did was to be able to calculate a cigarette butt pollution index, a CBPI. And so the index, was a very low pollution index right up to a severe pollution index. And the calculation for that they made around cigarette butt pollution index incorporated the density of cigarette butts, so what they were finding in their data collection, and it also took into different considerations like what and how contaminants might impact the environment. So things that are relevant would be sort of the surface, the permeability of the whatever the butts are on. Is it on concrete, for example, versus if it's on a sandy soil? The calculations also included things like annual rainfall to help estimate sort of mobilization of some of the constituents, and of course, relevant to understanding pollution, the distance from groundwater, where the groundwater you would hit groundwater, how deep you went down. So those are all sort of factors in this calculation for the cigarette butt pollution index. And they additionally they did a leachate experiment. This was a lab-based study based on the cigarette butts that they collected in the field. They picked butts. They decided to use cigarette butts from the most commonly sampled brand that they found, and then they had a process whereby the cigarettes were sort of placed in situ, and the leachate that was generated, they could measure concentration of specific constituents of interest. So they were interested in 16 different PAHs, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and as well as 12 different metals. And thirdly, they were trying to understand the whether or not the butts could help them understand whether the brand that they came from was permitted to be sold in the country. So Anvisa has a list of brands that are have access to the market, and they were able to compare against that list based on what they found. So what did they find? So the students that were in the field collecting butts, they collected over 4,300 butts, and then when they did their calculations, sort of understanding how many butts per square meter of collection area, it worked out to roughly one per every 5 square meters. So if you can remember them along the roadside and the interface between the road and the sidewalk, you'd walk about 5 meters and then maybe a step and a half and find a cigarette butt if it was evenly distributed. They were curious whether or not the density of the neighborhoods was relevant. You might hypothesize that a higher density neighborhood, there's more people, you might find more butts. They actually found that there wasn't any difference between the high and medium density parts of the city, but the lower density had the highest, which is sort of interesting, I think. When we looked at the leachate, or when we calculated that cigarette but pollution index, that was the one that incorporated many things. Across all 9 sites, we can see the classification from that low pollution to severe pollution. We found a lot that using this calculation were classified as severe pollution or significant pollution. One sampling area, S6, was a low pollution, and if we look at the density of cigarette butts there, it was relatively low. So that's driving a lot of that, because the only other variables that differed were the pathways. That's the different sort of soil or surface that the butts are sitting on. Because this within the same city, the annual rainfall and water table would be similar. If we look at the identification of specific constituents from the leachate study, you can see that which compounds were identified. There were some that were below detection, but I think what's really interesting here is that the identification of things like naphthalene were quite high. If you look at all the pHs together, the nanograms per liter were over 1,000, and other heavy metals that would be of concern for us, like it's the lead, I think, that's popping up. So uh, this demonstrates that the type of cigarette butts identified in these environments are going to create leachate that can contaminate water bodies and soils with um, constituents that are of great concern. The brand identification, over 4 and 5 out of 4 out of the 5 cigarettes did have markings on them, whether they be logos or actual names. You can see in this picture, you can sort of read the brand name there, the branding coloring and other sort of markers. In the study, they were able to determine over 80% which brands they were. Now, for some of them, there's some challenges because some of the brands might have been sold legally or not. So they are, as a study team, presenting a range of illicit brands within their sample from between about 22% to about 37%. We can see some of the examples here. So the black Jarum brand, for example, the one on the left has the stamps and the markers to indicate that it has the legal right. It's permitted to be sold, but the same butt could have come from a jurisdiction that is not Brazil and is lacking some of the important markings to indicate that it's likely illicit. So there's limitations, but the vast majority of the sample, they were able to answer that question. So um, from their study, the study team concluded that um, these are useful and valid ways to consider answering some of these questions. The leachate study demonstrated that there are these cigarette butts can serve as a source of toxic metals and other constituents that can enter the environment. And the legality dimensions are also well studied using these. So let's take a step out of South America. We're gonna uh, go pretty far around to the other side of the world, and we're gonna look at a second study, but similarly looking at litter, but in the context of India. And India is a super interesting market for tobacco use. Almost 270 million tobacco users in India. It's just mind-boggling the scale and scope. If we look at what types of products are being used, like I said earlier, smokeless tobacco is the most common. About 21% of adults use a form of smokeless tobacco. BDs are the most commonly smoked or combustible tobacco product, and cigarettes represent only 4% of the only 4% of adults are using those products. So the smokeless tobacco is commonly sold. You can see this is a vendor. She's selling lots of different products here, but behind her hanging up, these packets would contain a mixture of tobacco and other flavorants, perhaps, that would be used by users. And so when we talk about litter from smokeless tobacco, it's the packaging like what you're seeing there. BDs, this is an image of this product. It's a hand rolled, sometimes characterized as a cottage industry in India because so many people are involved in the production of these products. They're less standardized, obviously, because they're made by hand. When you smoke it, there will be, it's not smoked right until it's all gone. So there would be sort of the remaining aspect of the BD. Some BDs include a filter, like you might find a filter in cigarettes, but that's less common. Beaters are often sold in these sort of paper wraps. Sometimes it's repurposed newsprint. And so the packaging to sort of collect the BDs together is very variable as well. And cigarettes, of course, lots of different brands that are common in India. And like I said, among the main types of tobacco, it's the least used in population. So this study team Joanna and Kevin and Bakir at IGTC work this along with Grazi, and we had some tremendous support from our in-country partners at the Center for Public Health Research in Kolkata, Paramita and Nirmalia, who are just wonderful colleagues. And the study of this goal, we sort of had two different things we were trying to accomplish. We wanted to just quantify and characterize tobacco litter, sort of in this understanding that there's a wide range of products that are being used, what was present in the environment, and then further to assess if a brand name or logo was visible and identifiable on the tobacco litter, with the argument that these types of litter products in the environment could function as a form of post-consumer marketing. We were fortunate to be able to do some pilot work on the study because we conceptualized this study, but we weren't certain how easy or difficult it was going to be to collect these data. Would it be possible to understand when the street cleaning cycles were? Turns out we were able to do that in Kolkata and in the other communities where we did the work. We weren't sure about the walking environment, the pedestrian environment, and whether it would be feasible to have someone walking along with a smartphone taking pictures, or whether it would just be too busy to do that kind of work. We didn't know how long it would take. Was this an unreasonable sort of expectation? Um, were would the tobacco product waste be visible, or would it be mixed in with other products? Was it going to be a safe sort of assessment? If you've got your head down, you're looking at things in a busy road, would that be an like not an advisable activity for folks doing data collection? And operationalizing the data collection, specifically, what and how wide a swath. We saw in Brazil that they basically did about 1 meter, but if you're walking down a pedestrian environment in India, how wide is that? Um, so we ended up landing on about a 3 meter width for our observations based on our field study. So our lateral observation route, a person walking would look roughly 1.5 meters to either side, and that would be their data collection area. We did not have concerns with safety. The litter was easily identifiable. Whether or not we captured all of it, we probably didn't. And the other aspects were reasonable. And so we proceeded to stage our study in these 9 different cities across the country. And the objective here was to pick cities that were from different regions and had um, different types of tobacco product use across the different cities. And within each city, we would identify observation routes, 15 different routes, and we would ground truth them ahead of time. They were again within each city. We were dispersed geographically across the cities, and the observation routes were about 250 meters. And so, in total, for the study across 9 cities, 15 different routes, we conducted 135 distinct observation data collection periods. And our data collectors would visit these sites, they would conduct their assessments using a smartphone, and then if they found something, they would classify the tobacco product waste as either a cigarette butt or a beady butt. And then it was either cigarette packaging or beady packaging or smokeless tobacco packaging. And the each item of litter was examined, and they took a photo of that as well, and then in the field identified whether or not the product that they were looking at had enough brand name or logo that they could discern what the brand was. They were instructed not to touch the litter, so it was just as they saw it in the environment. And then each one of those items was photographed and geocoded. So what did we find? There's a lot of methods for something that's fairly straightforward. Well, our data collectors were able to identify over 17,000 items of litter. And if we look at it sort of from this graphic, the vast majority of our sample was, in fact, smokeless tobacco packaging, which is the most commonly used product, and it is fairly easy to identify. As you could see from the image before, they're often very brightly colored and very commonly littered too. When people tend to purchase smokeless tobacco, often they're immediately torn open, the product is consumed, and the package commonly littered. Cigarette butts were the next most common form of tobacco product waste in our sample, and it was over a quarter. And when you add in the cigarette butts, it's the cigarette butts with the cigarette packaging at 3%. We're almost like 3 in 10 items in our sample is related to cigarettes. And I'll just remind folks that cigarettes were the least commonly used form of tobacco, representing only about 4% of the population. Now, the BD packaging was only 1%, but still in a sample of 17,000 pieces, that's 170 BD packs that were identified in the field. I think what's really important to note too is that in this study, every type of tobacco product litter was identified in every one of our sampling routes, and the composition we're presenting here across our whole sample, but the composition of the waste type per city was very similar, except in the city of Chennai, where they had a higher proportion of cigarette butts relative to the other cities. When we looked at the post-consumption marketing aspects, we found that 81% of the pieces of litter was visibly branded, and the data collectors in the field were able to look at that tobacco product litter and determine what brand it was. So, as you imagine, with a cigarette pack, almost all of them were. It was easy to determine what kind of brand it was. Um, BDs and smokeless tobacco as well. The butts would be a lot more common among the cigarette butts, but the BD butts, only about a quarter of them we could determine. And like I said, when we showed the image, there's a lot of variability in what BD butts maybe look like, and um, it's truly remarkable. I think the data collectors were able to identify as many as they could in these different environments. And so we have published some of this work and put the article up here that folks can visit and review. But basically, the take home there was, across our sample, the branded aspects really represents the an opportunity potentially for the industry to make sure their products are branded so that when they're in environment, these can function as a form of post-consumption marketing. So the insights from this specific study in India is like observing litter is was a feasible way. We were able to collect these data, and we were able to accomplish the other aspects of our goal. The smokeless tobacco packaging, like I said, can be made of very resilient materials like plastics and foils that, like cigarette butts, can exist in the environment in perpetuity. The cigarette butt waste was a much larger proportion of our overall observations relative to its consumption rates. And things like the BD waste, I suspect, is a little bit underestimating based on what and how we were doing our methods. Often they're wrapped in repurposed newsprint, which would be difficult to ascertain in the field as a form of tobacco product waste. It's a reuse of something, I guess we can consider that. And the difficulty and challenge of identifying BD butts. So implications that I think there's a lot of considerations from this study and the Brazil study when we look broadly at tobacco control policies and strategies. I think there's a lot of opportunities to regulate packaging and products to reduce their environmental impact. There's certainly a lot of interest in eliminating filters, sort of keying into this movement around single-use plastic and all the opportunities there. The role of plain and standardized packaging is very important. We've seen a lot of movement on that for things like cigarette packs. We can extend that and expand it to the actual products, removing branding from things like the cigarette butt. And there's a lot of opportunity to look at other areas of public policy in terms of what and how we can design policy to protect stormwater or surface water from some of these constituents impacting their quality. There's a lot of opportunity too, I think, from these studies to further engage other partners in our tobacco control efforts, whether they be water quality experts or even in the case of places that are going smoke-free in their beaches and around the elimination of this form of pollution and litter. Tourism advocates could be very helpful. Folks that work in wildlife protection. And we've seen sort of the opportunities here to use some of these methods to support trade and tax policies as well. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and bump it back to Joanna to have a bit of a conversation.
Wow, that's fantastic, Ryan. Thank you so much. I have a lot of questions, but first, just want to ask you if you're willing to tell us what your Zoom background is.
Oh, for sure. That's a lake that's in northern Ontario in the Temagami region, and it's a place that I love to go canoeing.
Oh, it looks gorgeous. Yeah. Hopefully you'll get there this season.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Maybe let me just start where you ended with some of the implications. I mean, there's so much in here and so many exciting ideas, and I love the idea of or the term post-consumption marketing. I think it's really it's brilliant. But in terms of the implications, do you have thoughts about how we can hold the tobacco industry accountable for, ruining our planet? Not just if you want to focus on the litter component, that's great. If you want to go broader, that's fine too.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of ways that corporations can be held accountable for their actions and impacts on the environment, including the tobacco industry. There's uh, more comprehensive sort of life cycle analysis that is done, and the idea that manufacturers are more responsible for the waste of their products too, and so what and how to use those sorts of calculations and strategies to build in the cost of a product to make sure that the industry has responsibility. They sort of say cradle to grave sometimes in these products. Uh, Different jurisdictions around the world are using legal mechanisms to, we've seen a lot of legal strategies to recoup costs from healthcare. Similarly, some jurisdictions are trying to recoup monies to compensate for impacts on the environment the industry has had. I think there's a lot of opportunity. I mean, everything from land use policies to what and how we restrict the industry, to not be able to, clear cut forests to be growing tobacco, to further requiring um, uh, policies like at the municipal level. We've seen communities in California, for example, include additional tax on tobacco products for explicitly for the cleanup of those products. I mean, it was just so interesting to look at some of the arguments and concerns from the 70s around litter and the increasing costs. And it's taken us 50 years, but we're finally starting to figure out ways and means to better true cost some of these products and their broad impacts on our communities.
Yeah, I think those are all great things, important things for us to do. Are you aware of any jurisdictions that really stand out that have moved forward, the best practice places?
Yeah, I mean, San Francisco, San Diego are jurisdictions that have had really creative policy approaches in terms of levying monies to support the cleanup, but also with efforts to protect surface waters. So, jurisdictions in California now are requiring things like the sewer grates to be a certain size so a cigarette butt can't get through. And so there's sort of policies to change our environment to further protect, but it's explicitly with cigarette butts in mind. Um, Also, with something like that, not only do you make sure they don't get into surface waters, but you have opportunities then to better measure and estimate the impacts because you could, if you wanted to, figure out the mass or number or quantity of butts that are impacting your jurisdiction.
Yeah, really neat. And I think, there's work going on globally on a plastics treaty as well. Do you have any updates on that?
I know at the in tobacco control, the Conference of the Parties, COP10 in Panama, there was Article 18, I think is the number, and there was basically a call for parties of the convention to really work on some of the broad environmental impacts of the tobacco industry, and really explicitly pointing out the futility of the filter. Like the filter. drives me crazy, and I think it's when I did my postdoc with Greg Connolly, it was just one of those things that really is like he was like, "The filter, it doesn't protect anyone's health, but we call it a filter. We've named it something. It's supposed to be filtering something, but, like, the actual benefit, there's a lot of understanding of what and how people use a cigarette with the filter can actually result in deeper deposition in the lungs. It's a highly, highly engineered part of a cigarette that is made of plastic. It's the same plastic that's used to make my glasses. It's going to be in the environment forever. And at the COP, there was this recognition that parties to the convention should really work on banning the filter.
Yeah, and, again, that's been talked about for a while, but maybe this is the decade we'll make some.
Maybe we don't have to wait 50 more years.
Yeah, so jumping to the specifics of the India study, and thank you for sharing all the methods and I mean, a really rigorous approach and very thoughtful as well. Um, I think you found like a lot of tobacco product waste around schools. Do you want to talk about that? What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, whenever we do a study like this, we have to make decisions of what and where to go. And India, like most places in the world, really want to protect the health of their younger people. So when we do studies like that and explicitly include neighborhoods that are near schools, it's helpful for folks on the ground that are advocating for better policies there. We know in India there's lots of rules around where people can sell tobacco relative distances from schools, and we know from some of our studies and our colleagues' work that that's not always being observed. I think there's the connecting the dots as the waste being generated from young people using tobacco products and littering near the schools, probably. And either way, when we incorporate this idea of post-consumption marketing, we can demonstrate that the students, when we did our sampling, we worked with local partners and people familiar with the neighborhoods. So the routes near the schools were where do the kids get let out, and then where do they tend to go, and we would pick our pathways along those sort of stretches of the street to do our best estimate of what a younger person might be exposed to in their day to day.
Yeah, so interesting. And then the Brazil study also really interesting with those indices and the way you explained it was really helpful that it also depended on the surface type it was on because that's going to make a difference. Um, do you know do you have thoughts on how this work can be used to advocate for stronger policies? And I think also that these particular findings were useful recently at COP.
Yeah, no, they certainly were. I mean, it's sort of interesting because we've done like lots of people have done studies to try and understand and measure these things in different lab settings or collecting leachate in different environments. But I think what was really helpful in the context of Brazil was that they did this field work. They identified the brand that was the most common. So they're using something that's obviously relevant to their specific community, and then measuring things that are sort of universally understood to be very dangerous for our health. And so it was we sort of we had to for years measure tobacco smoke in different environments and demonstrate like no, your community is not any different from someone else, but having those local data can be really helpful to advocate. And this is a community that relies on tourism. This is a community that's got a beautiful beach. There's a lot of sort of probably when you think about priorities within a community, people will want to protect the assets that are part of their community, part of their economy, and protect them. And so I think the Brazil study, in terms of what they were measuring, how they were measuring, was perfectly designed to support local decision making, but at the same time, be another point of data for other communities in terms of what and why it's so important that we keep these products out of the environment.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so given your long history and interest in environmental issues, are you Do you think that this is a topic that can really gain traction among people, I guess more environmentally focused groups? I mean, what's your sense of that? Is this
Yeah,
big
I think
enough for them or
y
for us?
I think, like, whenever we can work with other groups, it's a real win for us. The movement globally around single-use plastic, I think, is really important what's happening. We've visually seen those, huge islands of plastic floating in the Pacific. I think there's such a tangible realization that it was very hard for us to live without having plastic day to day, and a frustration around that. And so I think we're maybe not quite there yet, but I think adding in the cigarette, I I quite honestly think that a lot of people who use cigarettes don't know that their filter is plastic. And I think there's a real sort of cultural priority to make sure they snuff it out. There's a real importance that you don't want to cause a fire or something like that. But you think about, this push between the industry sort of suggesting it's all on you versus it's the same arguments that we saw. And um, in the image I showed in Maine of the butt collectors and how they're collecting the butts and recycling them into um, park benches too, right? It's like it's important that we don't have these butts go in, but we can't also in any way begin to credit the industry, like let them greenwash aspects of this. We need to have systems in place that enable people to do the right thing. Um, but we also have to be bold and think, like, I think there's a real strong argument for getting rid of the filter.
Yeah, yeah, good point. And then, and after that, there's all the packaging, some of the plastic packaging that you saw as well, and others. It's yeah. So maybe I think we're getting to the end of our time, but I wanted to ask you, Ryan, with the findings of these studies, the severe pollution indices in Brazil, the enormous number of pieces of
Yeah,
litter you
thousands.
observed in India, which is sort of unfathomable. How do you keep hopeful for the future? How do you think about all this and stay hopeful?
Oh, I think, like, that's why I wanted to really include that slide of the young people that had creatively collected the cigarette butts. And we had an innovations lecture not too long ago. Our colleague in Australia that was talking about his relationship with the art community. I think I'm really optimistic because I think we are beginning to get real cross-cutting opportunities for collaboration. It's going to reinvigorate our movement. We're going to help support other really relevant and important areas of environment and health. Because at the end of the day, like, we work in public health. We cannot be healthy if our environment's not healthy. I think we're really, uh, you know, we've come a long way since 1970 in some ways, and I am optimistic. I think we're at a phase now where, in the tobacco epidemic, we've our prevalence and what we're seeing in benefits, we can channel and keep the movement going, and adding these other sort of opportunities and strategies are gonna help us get to the end game.
Oh, that's great. Well, Ryan, thank you so much and happy birthday.
Thank you.
This was two really interesting studies that you presented, and just all your experience and insights and passion are just wonderful to hear. So, really appreciate this on our special Earth Day. Innovations lecture. I just wanted to say for all of you viewing the YouTube premiere, the live chat discussion has now also concluded. So we thank you for your participation today. Please, everyone, stick around for a short video and then join us again next month on May 15th for our final innovations lecture of the spring, which will feature Matt Myers, who is president of the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids from 2000 to 2023. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you again, Ryan, and we wish you all a very happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day.
The World Health Organization says 4.5 trillion cigarettes filled with heavy metals and chemicals are littered every year,
making them one of the most littered items
The most
on Earth.
littered item
É o
in the
artigo
world.
mais tirado no
Ce sont
mundo.
les objets
One
les
of the
plus
most
saugrenus.
littered items.
One of the most littered plastic items in the world.
When it comes to litter in our environment, cigarettes are clearly a huge part of a global problem. But what if tobacco product litter is also helping to fuel consumer demand?
Litter in general, and tobacco litter specifically, can be a common sight for people living in urban areas. Branded tobacco litter functions as a form of post-consumption advertising, or, in other words, marketing that continues after the product is consumed. Post-consumption tobacco advertising can be seen by people who don't personally use these products, which can lead to wider social acceptance of tobacco use.
To assess the presence of branded tobacco product litter in urban areas, the Institute for Global Tobacco Control conducted an observational study in India where 29% of the adult population and nearly 1 in 10 adolescents use tobacco products. This high prevalence is estimated to generate more than 170,000 metric tons of tobacco waste every year in India alone.
When we say branded tobacco litter, our study looked at cigarette butts and packs, beady butts and packs, and smokeless tobacco packaging containing brand names or logos. During 6 weeks of data collection across 9 cities, we identified more than 17,000 pieces of tobacco product litter and found that the vast majority, 81%, was branded.
So aside from putting litter in its place and keeping our streets and roadways clean, what can be done to control this massive problem?
Plain and standardized packaging of all tobacco products is a solution that has been proven to reduce product appeal and would also limit the potential of post-consumption advertising.
Removing plastic filters would be another positive step. They offer no health benefit, and plastic can remain in the environment forever. These are evidence-based solutions that would work in India and other countries anywhere.
Bottom line, branded tobacco litter expands the visibility of an industry that already spends billions in advertising on addictive, deadly products, providing significant additional free exposure that policy interventions can prevent.